Hello and welcome to HIDS.
We're here in majestic, bustling Cairo, bringing you the 7th annual DNA Hit of the Year.
I'm Tim Shellberg.
And I'm Vanessa Lynch.
We're from GTH DNA, and we couldn't be more excited to share this year's selection of fascinating cases.
The cases we're covering today truly show the value of why it's important to share them with the world through the Hit of the Year program. As highlighted in these cases, crime labs and police departments from all over the world are able to learn so much from each other by sharing the strategies used to solve these cases. And how amazing to be in Cairo for this year's program. Not only is Egypt the gateway to Africa, it also holds the key to so many mysteries of the most ancient civilizations, making it the perfect place to showcase the strides being made by so many African countries to join the world with establishing their DNA databases. Later in today's program, I'll be sharing some of these exciting developments.
For this year's DNA Hit of the Year program, we chose not to rank the 6 finalists as we did in the previous years. Rather, all 6 finalists will be considered this year's DNA Hit of the Year. During our review of these cases, you'll hear from both crime laboratories and police on how they've harnessed the incredible power of DNA databases to solve the unsolvable. Our first case comes from Jacksonville, Florida, USA. In August 2021, a brave young woman serving in the United States Coast Guard was shot and killed when she confronted a thief breaking into her car. The DNA story you're about to hear highlights how having the world-class DNA database program combined with the tenacious detective work can solve even the most challenging cases within days. To present this case, we have Brooke Hoover with us today. Brooke is a crime laboratory analyst and regional CODIS administrator with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Brooke, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. This was not a simple crime scene to criminal offender match case, yet the team was still able to solve it within days. We're looking forward to hearing how.
Thank you, Tim. We chose this case to submit because it exemplifies the power of forensic DNA testing, DNA databases, and how this technology can provide investigative leads in a timely manner. To give a little bit of background on this case, there had been an auto burglary ring in the area. When the victim went to her car in the morning to leave for work, she encountered a thief. The thief shot her and fled the scene. He was later picked up by an unknown accomplice. The day the crime occurred, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office contacted the laboratory to request expedited DNA testing in order to perhaps identify a person of interest through the CODIS database. Within hours of the crime occurring, they submitted clothing that the suspect left on the flight path, a beanie, hat, and a shirt. We started testing, and within a day, we had a male resolved from the clothing, and we searched it in CODIS. Unfortunately, this did not provide any investigative leads. When I called the agency to give them preliminary results, they asked about genetic genealogy. However, all of the samples we had were mixtures. They were not suitable for genealogy, so they requested that I go back to the clothing, retest a different area in hopes of obtaining a single source sample. So I did. I went back. I took a different sample, this time from the armpits of the shirt. Previously, I had sampled the collar. This resulted in a mixture. We were able to resolve a different donor to the mixture. This was searched in CODIS, and within 4 days, we had a name of a person of interest. I called the agency on a Saturday and gave them the name. To talk about what happened next, these are Detectives Billy Abbott and Ash Saunders from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
My name is Detective Ash Saunders. I was the backup detective on this case while my partner, Billy, was the lead. Where I gathered evidence from our evidence technicians after they were collected at the scene along the path, and I hand delivered them to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And I was in relatively constant communication with Brooke Hoover from the biology lab. When Ms. Hoover called me and said that we did not have a profile and that it was not eligible for genetic testing and it was not eligible, we didn't have enough to obtain a suspect through CODIS, I requested that she go back and search or test another part of this shirt. Through speaking with my partner detectives and having responded to the scene, I knew that day was very hot and very humid. And I thought that perhaps the armpits would be a good area on the shirt that would accumulate a large amount of DNA that would give us the best statistical chance of obtaining a full profile. Thankfully, Ms. Hoover was completely receptive to this, and she jumped right at the task and retested the clothing. And in very short order, we had learned that we did obtain a full profile and were able to move forward. And Detective Abbott and I, we jumped on this as soon as we had the information so that we could try to get justice for this victim and her family.
And this is a perfect example of where Detective Saunders is assisting me in this investigation by thinking ahead of what else can we test on that shirt instead of just crossing it off the list and moving on to something else. This was a very key moment in this investigation, which helped us to go to the next person, which led us to our suspect.
The outcome of this case was entirely dependent on the quick mutual efforts of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, detectives and responding officers, as well as my colleagues here in the biology section of the Jacksonville Operations Center of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Lastly, I would like to thank our DNA investigative support database. Everybody was all hands on deck for this case. And lastly, I would like to mention Caroline Scholart, the victim in this case. Her courage truly lived up to the Coast Guard motto of Semper Paratus, which means always ready.
Thanks, Brooke. What an incredible job your team did. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement is certainly a world-class organization. The confidence and speed in which Florida works to solve cases is exemplary. And speaking of speed, Florida will soon become the second state in the United States to begin using rapid DNA for arrestees at the booking station. Imagine the crime-fighting advantage Florida will have when their incredibly efficient casework system is combined with rapid DNA in 90 minutes for criminal offenders.
When done with effective safeguards for privacy, familial searching is an effective and helpful tool to accomplish the goals for both humanitarian efforts as well as in a criminal justice system. A very sad case from Madrid in Spain illustrates this point. In 2012, the body of a baby girl was found in a garbage dumpster. With her umbilical cord still attached, it was determined that the baby had died from severe head traumas as well as asphyxiation immediately after birth. The Spanish police quickly realized that to solve this case, they needed to identify the baby's parents, but the only evidence from the crime scene was the baby's DNA. We're fortunate to have Spanish National Police Inspector Luis Peñas with us today. Hi Luis, thank you for joining us. Can you please explain how you used familial searching with a baby's DNA to solve this case?
Mi nombre es Luis Miguel Jiménez Peñas, soy inspector jefe de la Policía Nacional, uno de los cuerpos policiales que existen en España. Tenemos 6 laboratorios en España, pero nuestro lugar de trabajo es el laboratorio central que está ubicado en Madrid. Quiero hablarles acerca de un caso que ayudamos a resolver y que tuvo un gran impacto en España. La historia comenzó en mayo de 2012, cuando los empleados de una planta de tratamiento de residuos se llevaron una gran sorpresa. Entre la basura encontraron el cuerpo de una pequeña niña muerta. Era una recién nacida y la autopsia determinó que había nacido viva y la causa de su muerte era asfixia mecánica y trauma severo en la cabeza. Era un homicidio de una pequeña niña indefensa. Por ello, tuvo una gran repercusión en todos los medios de comunicación en España. La basura cerca del cuerpo y el origen de los camiones fueron investigados sin éxito. Un perfil genético se obtuvo de las muestras que se recogieron del cuerpo de la niña. La búsqueda en la base de datos CODIS no tuvo éxito porque obviamente nadie estaba buscando a esa niña. El tiempo pasó y llegamos a 2020, donde la base de datos CODIS ofrecía la posibilidad de usar el módulo de Pedigree Tree, que permite buscar la compatibilidad entre el perfil genético de personas no identificadas, cadáveres no identificados, con el de criminales relacionados con delitos en relaciones familiares cercanas. Así que nuestro equipo recobró este caso sin resolver, construyó un pedigree tree para realizar esa comparación. Debido a la novedad de esta búsqueda, decidimos pedir autorización judicial para asegurarnos las garantías legales durante el proceso. Ello es debido a que en España la ley de protección de datos que firman las personas detenidas permite su investigación para esclarecer hechos delictivos, no para investigar relaciones familiares. Y en este caso sospechábamos que quizá la persona a la que íbamos a encontrar en la base de datos no era la persona que finalmente había sido la autora de la muerte de la niña. Por eso pedimos la autorización judicial. Como resultado de esta búsqueda, el perfil genético de la niña resultó compatible con el perfil genético de un hombre que había sido detenido en el año 2011 acusado de un delito de lesiones en Madrid. Es importante resaltar que los perfiles existían en la base de datos, los dos desde 2012, solo que la búsqueda, la base de datos CODIS, el software, no había permitido relacionarlos hasta el año 2020, ¿vale? La información fue comunicada a los grupos de investigación. Resultó que este hombre no sabía nada de lo que había sucedido, pero sí proporcionó información acerca de la mujer con la que había tenido una relación sentimental en ese momento. Esta mujer fue localizada y, después de su sorpresa inicial, sí reconoció haber dado a luz a una niña viva, haberla estrangulado con un cinturón, haberla golpeado en la cabeza y, una vez muerta, haberla tirado a la basura. El análisis del perfil genético de esta mujer determinó que era la madre de la niña que había aparecido en la basura. El juicio por este caso se ha celebrado hace unos meses y la sentencia se ha conocido hace unos días. 15 años en prisión. De nuevo, todos los medios tuvieron mucha repercusión de todo esto. Se hicieron mucha repercusión de todo esto. Este ha sido el primer caso de un niño abandonado que hemos resuelto en España, pero no es el único. Hemos tenido varios éxitos más en este sentido. Esto demuestra el potencial de la nueva búsqueda, de las búsquedas como nuevas formas de investigación, especialmente en el caso de niños abandonados, como es este caso. Yendo un poco más allá, con el gran potencial de esta búsqueda, estamos trabajando para usar esta metodología para resolver otros delitos graves en los que el perfil genético es la única vía de investigación, buscando su compatibilidad con esos perfiles con otros que puedan estar en la base de datos. Como he dicho antes, para todo esto solicitamos siempre autorización judicial previa, porque buscamos relaciones familiares y seguramente buscamos vías de investigación y seguramente las personas que identifiquemos en la base de datos no sean los autores finales del delito que se está investigando. Este es el caso del que quería hablarles y estoy a su disposición por si necesitan cualquier otra pregunta o aclaración. Y antes de terminar, quería dar las gracias públicamente a mi equipo por hacer también su trabajo y decirles que me siento muy afortunado de trabajar con ellos. Gracias.
What an impressive result from the Spanish National Police team. Their persistence to use this unique application of familial searching certainly paid off. Our next case comes to us from the Kingdom of Bahrain. This case also uses a creative application of familial searching to identify the criminal. While familial searching is what led to identifying the criminal, this case is about so much more. It's about the scourges of terrorism and how DNA has emerged as a major force to identify criminals involved in assembling and detonating bombs. DNA Hit of the Year welcomes our special guest correspondent, Dr. Bruce Bedoli, who visited with Dr. Nora Al-Asnan, a DNA leader from Bahrain's Ministry of Interior. Bruce, it's great to have you and Dr. Al-Asnan with us today. What can you tell us about the advancements Bahrain is making in using DNA in terrorism cases?
Well, thank you, Tim. Nora I'm really glad to speak with you today because I've been following your work for a while now, not just because of the DNA and the research that you've done, but also under the unique circumstances of which you work in your country to address some of the challenges you have with the crime that you're encountering every day. So first, I'd really like to get people to know a little bit about who you are. So could you tell us a little bit about you?
My name is Noura Rashid Al-Snan. I have joined the Ministry of Interior since 2008 as a forensic science researcher. So basically, we are handling all the cases in Bahrain. We have only just one lab, which is the Forensic Science Laboratory under the Ministry of Interior, Bahrain Police. So we're the main lab handling different type of cases, such as the robbery, murder, sexual assault, terrorism, fire, vandalism, kidnapping, child trafficking, and paternity cases as well.
So you have a database as well, is that correct?
Yes, the database, it's in separate lab. The database is shared between the reference sample as well as the casework samples. Every week we're having 2-3 hits or matches.
Some of your research, I think, also plays into this as well. Depending on the region of the country, there's a lot more sharing of types, suggesting a little bit more of inbreeding in some populations versus others in Bahrain.
We have a lot of inbreeding, consanguineous marriages in Bahrain.
Yeah, and the other research that I think also plays into this, we'll get into in a minute with your case, is the work you were doing with C4 and DNA typing. And so could you tell us a little bit about that? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of countries are dealing with terrorism and bombings, and your experiences could help them as well.
Yes, Bruce, since the 2012, we have been in an unrest period of Terrorism Act and a lot of riots, outlaws. They were throwing Molotov bottles and causing a lot of disturbance for the system, and there were a lot of casualties regarding this type of actions. So since 2012, we have started working on a lot of Molotov bottles, IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, which we were not familiar at all, and it was something we were not having any experience at all, because we used to have a lot of robberies and sexual assault, and suddenly we were handling a lot of cases that we were not familiar how to handle. We started doing our own validation, our own research on different type of samples, such as the C4, different type of plastics, the PVC pipes, and IEDs, different parts of the IEDs, the tapes, the electronic devices, and for beginning, it was mainly negative cases. Then we started changing the swabbing system. Instead of a single cotton swab, we did a double swab or double cotton swab, or sometimes nylon flock swab. Some of the samples we used to direct cut the samples, such as the tapes. So we did research along the way until we reached for the methodology how to recover DNA from these type of samples.
Yeah, in fact, you did some work to show that C4, for example, does not inhibit the PCR process, and which also is, I think, a fundamental bit of knowledge to let people know that they can swab devices, pre and post explosion, that could be helpful in identification.
Some of the labs, they used to skip the DNA recovery from those samples because they were not aware that there is a lot of astonishing findings, really, from the samples contaminated with C4 or any other type of explosive material. Because from the nature of the C4, it's like a mold, which you can shape it as what you want. So it was collecting a lot of the skin cells. And we found a lot of hits or matches doing a direct swab from the C4. But first, we have to make sure that all the samples are safe to work on.
Yeah, I mean, given the situation where you have a number of IEDs and terrorist acts going on, I know in my country and probably a lot of other countries, this would create a very critical, chaotic environment where we would need answers quickly. And
Yes.
you, with the case that you've presented, which not only affects that case, but many other cases as well, shows the complexity of the issues you have and really some complex solutions that could help. So I was wondering if you could tell us now about your case and what were what happened in those cases and what were some of the motivations to get you to use the techniques or methods that you use to identify the potential perpetrator of those crimes.
Since 2015, we were having a lot of IEDs. They were hoax IEDs, not real. And the issue with working with these cases is during the time where the terrorists deployed the hoax IEDs, sometimes there used to be a real one near to the hoax. So usually what they are doing, they were used to deploy the hoax in an open area, and then just when the police they were handling these type of let's say non-harmful or unharmful IEDs, then there's another IED, real one, just behind the corner where it's going to explode and wipe all the police. So we used to be very careful even for a unharmful cases such as the hoax. So in 2015, we had a series of hoax IEDs that were similar in its doing, wires connected with tapes and some plastic or cans. And they were deployed in different northern directorate areas such as Ali, Buri, and Hamad Town. So basically, what we used to do is separate the whole components and swap the wire or wipe the wire using a Kim wipe, which we sterile and use as a wiper. And then we used to swab the inner areas of the plastic pieces, and then direct cut the tape and swab the remaining of the plastics or the can. So basically, for each of IED, it can reach up to 30 swabs or samples for each IEDs. Then each of the sample will be handled separately, and then we will reach for a DNA profile. So because we were acting on each of the parts of the sample alone, so we used to have a single profile of the same person. So since 2015 till 2017, we used to have one male unknown person who was a link to all of these cases, all of the DNA collected from all of the IEDs. So the total of 34 IEDs, different parts of IEDs, such as the tapes, wires, plastics, and cans, they were linking and targeting one male, unknown male. And so he was unknown till 2020, where we got him in a match.
I mean, this gives you great intelligence, Lee, just to tie the cases together to know that you have a similar group or individuals involved in making the hoax or the real IEDs. But you also use some other genetic tools that are not traditionally used in I'd say in the way that most people use it in their countries, where you have a profile, you search for somebody in a database, and you look for a hit. You didn't have the person in the database. You used another means. And I thought that to be very interesting in the way you're using, advanced thinking and genetics from the studies that you've done to help identify the person. So could you tell us about that as well?
Bruce, because my PhD was population genetics, so I was handling more than 500 samples, 500 DNA profiles. So how can we get benefit from the inbreeding? We have someone in the lab that she was from a 3-generation cousin marriage. So we took samples from her father and mother, and as well as herself and her husband and her children. So basically what we have noticed that they were having a lot of homozygous runs. So the profile was like more than 9. Let's say if I'm talking about global filer with a 24 loci, there were like 9 or 10 loci a homozygous. And many of the tourism cases that those type of unknowns, the DNA profile has a lot of homozygous runs. We have entered or checked the database only for the homozygous and the microvariant that is found in the profile of the unknown. So it came a direct, let's say, a match or a half match with a person who was in jail for a terrorism act. I have searched the person address, and there's one of the brothers who does not have a DNA in our database. So we called the person to come to give us a DNA sample, and he came himself and he signed a consent and he gave a DNA sample. So he came a hit on all the 34 IEDs parts from the 2015 till 2017. So basically, the indirect matching or the partial match, it's same as, let's say, a kinship match. This procedure was done for different type of cases in Bahrain, but mainly it's for the tourism, as it's seen that the Tourism Act is like inherited between the brothers to do. So this is the methodology we came up, that because of the inbreeding, because of the high number of the homozygous in the profile, we can use those homozygous peaks to check in the database, and instead of going for the whole DNA profile and checking, because when we go for the whole 24 global filer kit, it will not come a hit or a match.
So, I mean, this case shows the success that one can have when you start to think outside the box, as we say, for looking for ways to have solutions, knowing the genetics of the people and the population in your area.
I have several cases which we handled, and we got real nice finding using the partial matching methodology.
Well, Nora, I mean, this obviously takes a lot more work than just a case where you get a profile and search the database. So are you using these just for these really heinous crimes like terrorism?
Many of the robbery cases we have in Bahrain, we are directly finding a full profile matching. But anytime I'm having an unknown profile, I would do this methodology. I would search the partial hit as well. But because of the terrorism, it's like the inherited act, so it is always fitting the terrorism criteria of type of cases.
This has been a great success, and I really like the way that you're looking beyond just the traditional tools to help solve crime, especially terrible crimes that we're all encountering even more so today than ever before. If you had, the crystal ball or the magic wand to make anything happen, what would you like to have as the next great tool or magic device that you could use to help solve more crimes in your lab?
I would like to see is that a software that can be used as a familial search, because sometimes when I have the partial match, it's more than 20 or 30. Sometimes it's thousands of known person. So I would say I would like to see a developed software that can do the familial search.
There are some software that exist for familial searching already that might work for your circumstances because they use the same general principles as what you relied on, as matching alleles. Rare alleles obviously give stronger support for a relationship. That's great in software. Would you like to see any advanced tools to identify other genetic markers that could help in the process? Because you relied on homozygous. I was also thinking that sometimes you have a YSTR, or if there's siblings with mitochondrial DNA, they might share because they might have the same mother. These might hone that as well. And I didn't know if you have considered using them as much as what you've done with the homozygous autosomal markers.
Yes, I agree with you that regarding the YSTRs, because we have families having the same marriages, but also we have a lot of family names that we can have their own YSTR database. I have a database of YSTRs, more than 560 samples of different families in Bahrain. So usually when I have an unknown, I'm checking also as well as YSTR in the database. So we have another YSTR database Until now, we did not find a match, but this is again another tool I'm using because I know that each specific family, sure name in Bahrain, that they have a specific YSTR.
Probably on the last thing I'd like to address is what kind of advice you could give to other countries. You know, there are a lot of countries that are experiencing terrorism, particularly, and how would they put together a program? Could they learn from you? Can they learn from others? What would you give them as recommendations to get them started or to advance them from where they are today?
You know, terrorism, it's an act against the humanity. So we are all facing the terrorism and in Bahrain and in outside Bahrain and other countries. So I advise and I recommend everyone to do research and to validate their work and to not to skip the DNA part because DNA part is very important for terrorism cases. Um, I'm still afraid that some of the labs still they don't process DNA for the IEDs or for different type of samples because they are afraid or they don't think that there's a really good results to bring out from the terrorism cases. But I can assure you that while working since 2012 until today on the tourism cases, that we got a lot of really good matching on these type of cases, starting from Molotov to Hawks, reaching till a very more dangerous tourism such as cases such as the C4s and RDX. So I would really advise everyone to go forward on doing all their forensics intelligence on the tourism, and we are happy to help and contribute in this side.
Yeah, I think you've made a really important point and a distinction in some of the work and why the work you're doing is so important.
Thank you, Bruce.
Well, thank you so much, Nora. It's really been great talking to you again. And back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Bruce. Dr. Alsnan's work on this case and her extensive research using DNA in terrorism cases is impressive. With terrorism impacting every region of the world, I'm sure our viewers will find Dr. Alsnan's work and publications incredibly helpful. Our next case highlights how DNA led to identifying a serial killer who terrorized Denver, Colorado in the late 1970s. What's unique about this case is how the non-government database strategies of genetic genealogy teamed up with the government DNA database to ultimately solve these crimes. With us today is DNA Hit of the Year's long-serving partner, Rock Harmon. Rock, you're with the Denver Police Department today. This case sounds fascinating. Tell us how genetic genealogy partnered with familial searching to identify this serial killer.
Thank you, Tim, and welcome back to another DNA Hit of the Year for 2023. I'm here today with two criminalists from the Denver Police Department Crime Lab, well renowned for their commitment to solving cold cases. First, I'd like to introduce Eric Duval. Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career with Denver PD.
My name is Eric Duval. I'm a supervisor in the Forensic Biology and DNA Unit, the Denver Police Department Crime Laboratory. I've been with the laboratory since 2008. I started working cold cases as a grant-funded project. That was my primary task, and carried that all the way through now, all the way into 2023.
And next to Eric is Tracy Carlson, well known as a former student of mine at UC Davis. Tracy, how long have you been with Denver PD?
Hi, yes, I'm Tracy Carlson, and I've been with the Denver Lab almost 5 years now.
Eric, tell us a little bit about the Denver commitment to solving cold cases from the perspective of the crime lab.
Our commitment to cold cases at the Denver Crime Lab started with our lab director, Gregory LeBerge, who, as soon as STRs were brought online in our laboratory in 1999, worked with major crimes to start pulling cases out of the freezer, cases they had worked previously, to get them typed in the most current technology.
Okay, and we're going to talk about a series of very violent murders that remain unsolved for decades. Is that part of the effort that Denver expended towards solving these cases?
Yeah, our efforts and that commitment and collaboration with kind of all the involved parties has really resulted in the successes that we've seen.
We're here to talk about a series that began in 1978 into the early 80s. Do you want to start that sequence of events so we can appreciate what was done and when it was done?
Yes, we had funding from the National Institute of Justice to work cold cases, multiple grants that we had had since that project was started in 1999. And we were starting to see successes. We had a case that went all the way through the legal process in 2010 of a sexual murder of a young woman. A CODIS hit was what solved that case. And that shifted our focus to working on other sexually motivated homicides that we had in our queue.
Why don't you start with the first chronologically that you came across in these efforts to solve these 4 murders?
Yes. So the first case that we worked was the case of Madeline Livaday. She was a housewife. She was home in the middle of the day. When her husband returned from work, she was discovered murdered in their upstairs bedroom. Her 2 children were still at home downstairs, and were able to develop a foreign male DNA profile that we put into the CODIS database, but no matches. We were obviously disappointed, hoping, especially after that previous success, to get another success under our belts. So our investigators were doing case reviews, and our cold case sergeant at the time was continuing to ask about the testing for Dolores Barajas. She was in town in Denver for the summer, working at a downtown hotel. She was discovered in an alley nearby, and through the course of the investigation, there was an indication that it could be sexually motivated. We were able to test her kit and eventually match the DNA profile from the first case to her case.
Okay, and tell us about the next crime in this sequence of crimes.
The third case that we were able to link was the case of Gwendolyn Harris, and she was also discovered in an alley. The sexual assault kit evidence that we processed resulted in a CODIS hit to the first case and the second case. We're looking at about 2013 when we had all 3 of these cases linked together.
Okay. Now, did you use familial searching during this time period?
Yes, especially when we were linking now 3 cases together, all to the same perpetrator. We knew we had a serial offender, and we had no real investigative lead beyond this DNA profile. So, of course, we wanted to look at familial searching. There was a case from Adams County. Antoinette Parks, a high school student, was discovered in an empty field, and she also had signs of sexual assault. When we worked her case up, it matched to our other 3 cases.
So you have 4 unsolved cases now.
We've done multiple familial searches at this time from 2013, about every 2 years, doing a familial search through the Colorado database. It has about 400,000 offenders, but no investigative leads through the familial search either.
And at that point in time, that's pretty much all you could do, but then you added some other tools to try to solve this case.
Yeah, we had an investigator that asked about the Y surname search, and that involves, as you know, using the Y STR profile, searching that haplotype in publicly available databases, trying to generate last names that are tied to that DNA profile in order to hopefully get a lead to our investigators.
And anything come out of that?
No success there either.
Time for something new to come along and try to solve these cases. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that's where Tracy comes in?
That's exactly what happens. We hear about this new technique out there called investigative genetic genealogy. As forensic scientists, as DNA folks in the laboratory, we know about these ancestry websites, 23andMe, learning about where your family comes from, and to hear that you could apply that to a forensic investigation was, another tool we had to try.
Great. Tracy, tell us how you got exposed to genealogy, because I know when you were my student, we never talked about that.
That is true. Yes, it's a very new technique. So actually, a colleague of ours, Stacy Hafner, does genealogy for adoptee cases just in her spare time. So she was actually the one that kind of came to our upper management, was like, hey, this is a cool new technique. Can we give this a try? And so she actually was successful in doing investigative genetic genealogy on one of our only unsolved homicide victim cases. And so after kind of getting our feet wet there, I asked if I could get involved, and she helped train me. And there were other police-oriented trainings that we found available that I was able to participate in to kind of get my feet wet and give this a try.
Were you familiar with the history that this case had undergone?
Not until I got assigned this case. It was one they had selected to send for sequencing to try genealogy on. So it was only once I was assigned the case that I learned everything that had been done prior.
Give us an idea what your approach was to this case.
Yes, so with genealogy, part of what we're looking for is we have our unknown DNA profile that is attributable to our suspect, and that gets sequenced and uploaded to these genealogy databases that allow for law enforcement to search in them. And the idea is that you're looking for close family matches to your unknown DNA, so potentially first cousins, second cousins, third cousins. And the closer the relationship, the easier it will be to identify your individual, because you'll get your family matches, build back their trees, and then build those ancestor trees back down to find where those DNA ancestors cross to each other.
In trying to develop a lead, if you could, did you make an observation that maybe changed your approach to the case?
Yes. So with this case, initially we were working with really distant matches, which makes it more challenging. So I had started to build out 11 different family trees. The final one I was working with had about 1,600 people in it, so not very narrow. But there were two families in this tree that were kind of sticking out to us through the investigation we'd done. So there was one family who we'll call the Whites. With this family, we had kind of that genealogical crossover event. We had different groupings of our family matches that had led us to a couple that married and had children. So that was one couple we were interested in. And then we had this other family, the Irvins. We were interested in them because one of the very initial trees I had built out, the ancestor we had come to was a man with the last name Irvin. So we hadn't yet made the connection there yet, but those two families were sticking out to us. The interesting thing with those families was that everyone in those groups were all from Texas and all from a very specific part of Texas. So it was kind of at that point that we had the thought, hey, maybe Texas would do a familial search of our sample, since everyone related to our trees seems to be in Texas.
During these complex investigations, because of Colorado, Denver's commitment to familial searching in the past, you knew Texas was doing familial searching. So you contacted them and asked them to help you?
Yep. Eric was able to contact Gary Molina and ask if he would be able to search the sample for us, and he said yes.
Your thinking was the premise behind familial searching, crime runs in families, and perhaps familial searching can give you an investigative lead to a close relative.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. How much time do you think you spent on the genealogy part of it?
I had been building trees off and on for about a year and a half.
Okay. And now Gary's receptive to it? He's not going to charge you?
Nope. They paid for all the work they did, which was incredible.
At some point, you learned that they had a lead for you.
Yes, so Gary reached out to us to set up a virtual Zoom meeting. And on this call, there were all the Texas Estes staff, Texas Rangers, all of us. So we figured it had to be good news.
And on the call, they gave you the name?
Yes. The name they gave us was Paul Irvin, and he was an individual that we already had in our family tree. We knew he was in the Texas DOJ system, and we had a bunch of his siblings also in our family tree, and there had been a few loose Colorado connections with his siblings, but the two siblings that we knew previously lived in Denver had moved on prior to the time of our crimes or passed away. So what was interesting was that when Paul entered the Texas DOJ system, he filled out a little card where he self-reported relatives. So he listed the parents who he knew about, he listed his brothers and sisters that we knew about, but then he also listed one brother that we had not come across, a man by the name of Joe Urban. So once we heard that name, having a name makes it much easier to find information on someone. We were able to find a wealth of information and find that he did live here in Denver. He had been married to a woman in Denver. An address that we had for him was only about 0.2 miles from where Gwendolyn Harris had been found. And then we were able to find a death certificate for him indicating that he died July 1981.
Ultimately, was his body exhumed in an attempt to definitively identify his DNA?
Yes, so our detective, once we had that death date for him, he found that he died in Adams County in their prison. So she reached out to Adams County to see what that case was about. And it turns out he had been pulled over for a possible DUI and overpowered the officer, Deborah Sucor, that pulled him over, shot her with her own gun, and then shot another Good Samaritan that had stopped to try to help. Went to his home. Officers were able to go to his home. He was actively trying to get rid of the handcuff that Deborah Sue had gotten on him. And that was at that point they arrested him. And in prison, he committed suicide and left a lengthy note. And with that information, it was learned that his body had been transferred back to Arlington, Texas. So that was when our detective was able to locate his burial site down there.
And another little twist that at the time of the homicide, he had been out on bail on a sexual assault case?
Yes.
I really have to say how much I appreciate and admire what you've done. There aren't enough laboratories, I think, that are given the freedom and the access to all the different tools that were had here. So Eric, Tracy, I just have to thank you and tell you how much I admire you, and I hope everybody's inspired by this story of never giving up and using everything that's available. Eric and Tracy have been unstoppable. I hope you can be too.
The Denver case shows what's possible when a country has a highly efficient DNA program and extraordinary coordination and cooperation across both jurisdictional and functional boundaries. While creating seamless DNA programs may be challenging in Africa, the motivation to use DNA in both humanitarian and criminal cases is evident in so many countries, South Africa being one of them. Almost 10 years ago, South Africa became one of the first African countries to pass DNA laws and implement a national DNA database program. While South Africa still has challenges which are apparent from the next case, it has also been an inspiration to so many countries in Africa to follow suit. We're starting to see significant interest in adopting policies to develop DNA databases throughout Africa. In particular, this growth has been exponential over the last 12 months, where we've seen multiple African countries positioning themselves to set up DNA database programs, such as in Kenya, Zambia, and Somalia, to name a few. On the 10th of October 2016, police death investigator Willie Fouché was requested to collect the body of an unknown female. Little did he know that this would become the start of a significant kidnap, murder and rape investigation, which would ultimately be solved with a match within South Africa's national DNA database. I recently sat down with Willie to discuss this case, as well as how improvements are needed in South Africa to take full advantage of their impressive DNA database program, which led to this match.
Yes, I'm Willie Fouché. I'm the facility manager at Forensic Pathology Service Bronkhorstspruit, but at heart I'm a death investigator. I started working at the SAPS in 2002, and then in 2006 I then went over to become a death investigator. Linda Matate was a 21-year-old. She was in the prime of her life. In October 2016, she went with her friends to a party. Her mother dropped her off. The day after that, the mother tried to contact her, but the mother couldn't get hold of her. Linda never answered the phone. She interrogated the friends, And they said that Linda went from the party with a male friend as well. So the mother was suspicion that something happened during that night. So they say this guy was well known to her, but the police suspected this guy was actually a cash in transit suspect that previously was arrested but never convicted of any cash in transit heists. The mother Gloria opened the case of missing persons at the closest police station, but they never came back to her. They never went and investigated this case. But the mother was adamant. And only after 2 to 3 months, she told them, but she have this information, please open a kidnapping case. And only after that did the police open a kidnapping case and escalated it. With a kidnapping case, it's a high profile. It actually escalates. So according to the legislation that is currently published, is that on that cases, a routine bugle swab must be taken of the suspect and put on a database so to check if this person doesn't have previous convictions. When they heard that he is the suspect on the missing persons and the kidnapping, then they escalated and they actually arrested him and took a bugle swab from him.
I just want my Linda back. That's all that I want.
After they loaded the sample onto the database, it actually matched with a sexual assault kit that was taken at our facility. In October of 2016, we received a call from the SAPS Bronkhorstspruit to go and collect human remains next to the R42, the Bronkhorstspruit-Delmas Road. They actually told us the remains is a bit decomposed, and we prepared our members. Our members went to the scene and found unknown human remains of a lady lying next to the road and in the bushes. From the beginning, this police suspected that this was a dumping where they just dumped the body. And they suspected this person was actually assaulted and beaten up. To identify the human remains, we then collect fingerprints as a primary identifier. And then if we cannot take good fingerprints, DNA will then be taken. We did take fingerprints, but we also collected a reference sample of DNA as well. And then in conjunction with the team, the pathologists, we saw that we also need to collect a DNA sample of a sexual assault kit, and the police also requested that. So the pathologists confirmed that this was not a natural death. And with inspection at the day of the post-mortem, she actually saw that this, suspected that this was also a rape and strangulation case. We then send the fingerprints to the local criminal records center, where it's run against the database of AFIS and Home Affairs. This results came back as could not be identified, unknown. After 30 days, if a person is unidentified in our facilities, the law, the National Health Act states that we can proceed then with the process of doing a pauper burial. That is according to the environmental health, because after 30 days, that body becomes a health risk for us. This time, I really felt like Linda had a family that was looking for her. I didn't do the pauper request. So for 9 months, Linda's body was at our mortuary. While on the other side, Linda's mother was adamant and looking for her daughter. Yes, a suspect was arrested and a DNA sample was taken. After a few months, he confessed and said yes, he did murder and dumped Linda's body. But he thought if they cannot get a body, he's not going to get convicted. After that, the sample that was taken from the suspect had a match on the sexual assault kit that we collected during the post-mortem. The investigating officer on this kidnapping and murder case was searching for a mortuary in the east of Pretoria. He couldn't get hold of us and actually asked Pretoria, do you have a mortuary in the east of Pretoria? And the facility manager at Pretoria Mortuary actually said, yes, Bronkhorstspruit. That investigating officer actually then contacted us and say, do you still have this human remains at your facility? And yes, I said, we do have this remains. He then contacted Linda's mother and say, we have this hit. This body is still at the Forensic Pathology Service Bronkhorstspruit. Well, that day, Linda's mother came to our facility. She was adamant to see this remains. The incident that she saw that remains, she recognized the facial features. Me and the investigating officer then again took a deceased identification kit. The report came back from the lab saying it's 99.9% that this remains is Linda's remains and that Gloria is the mother of Linda. And we could release with ease this remains to Linda's mother, and there she could get closure at the end of the day. The body was found, and this suspect was actually then convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder and rape of Linda Matate. The day when we received the report from a laboratory, I was so excited. You know, I felt that I could give Linda the last voice and to show Gloria that Linda was not just a number in our facility, but she was a human being and treated with dignity and respect, so that I can give the last voice to Linda to tell her mother, this is what happened to her. You can get closure. She was treated with respect.
Thank you so much for telling your story today. Would you mind just introducing yourself?
My name is Gloria Matadisibu. Linda is my first child, my first daughter. She was a very bubbly child, a respecting child, a go-getter. Whatever she did was amazing. Her schoolwork, in everything. She made me proud, in short. Linda didn't want to go to varsity full-time. We fought about that. I told her it's difficult to study and work. There was no need for her to work, but that's what she wanted. She said, Mom, I'll manage, I'll call you. She had so much going on in her life. She had goals, she had plans. She was like my friend. That's why I made sure that whether she was alive or dead, she will be found. I worked very hard to do that. At first, it's not impossible, but I kept on believing. I remember people telling me that you must just forget. It's too long. I said, no, I could never give up. And at the end, I did get my results. It was painful, but I was at peace at the same time. Because now at least I know Linda's grave. But I was told he knew that this child had a mother that was looking for her.
Well, he's here. As you know, he's here and he's the most amazing man. And I'm sorry you two couldn't meet in person. But I hope one day that you do get to meet in person.
Yes, yes.
When I go to, I'll give you a call. I'll pass there by you at Bronkhorstspruit.
What actually stood out for me on this case was the working together of all the parties. So if we can emphasize the routine collection of human remains DNA and DNA from scenes, and change legislation to emphasize that we must give a voice to this voiceless, so that each and every person in our facilities can be identified and can be treated as still a human being. I think we can go much further in reducing the unidentified human remains in our mortuaries. So currently in South Africa we have legislation that mandates the collection of DNA of arrestees and also sentenced offenders. But we do not have legislation that is mandatory to collect DNA from deceased or collect any DNA kits or swabs, evidence from a body. If we can have that, we can actually check and trend if there is a serial killer, a serial rapist. So to get legislation to also have this mandatory will actually assist us in solving crimes as well.
Great discussion, Vanessa. This case really does make the point that passing a law and implementing a criminal offender and crime scene evidence database is only the beginning to ensure that a national DNA database program is working at full capacity.
That's right, Tim. And it's essential that South Africa continues to support their DNA database programs. Because of their many hits and DNA successes, the rest of the continent really does look to South Africa for guidance. What South Africa builds with DNA will provide the framework most countries in Africa will follow as they embark on establishing their own DNA policies and programs.
Like Africa, Southeast Asia is seeing significant advancements in DNA database policy. While Singapore has long been the leader in the region, Malaysia has been steadily building its program and positioning to become the next impressive DNA database in Southeast Asia. And it's from Malaysia where we find our next case. In this dramatic jewelry heist case, Malaysia's developing DNA database capabilities are on full display. On scene from Kuala Lumpur is GTH DNA's Sarab Myra. Sarab serves as GTH DNA's Director of Asia. Great to have you with us today, Sarab. We're looking forward to hearing about the Malaysia case and the exciting DNA database updates coming out of Southeast Asia.
Thanks, Tim. That's right. Over the last few years, many Southeast Asian countries have been advancing their DNA programs, and Malaysia is one of the leading examples.
Yeah.
Today, I'm with ACP Dr. Hakim, who heads the DNA Data Bank Division of Royal Malaysia Police. And I would like to ask him about the progress that his division is making and also some interesting cases that he has solved. Hi, sir. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Sarab.
My first question to you, sir, is your data bank has made phenomenal progress over the last few years. Please, can you tell us more about that?
It is important to highlight the history of the development of our National DNA Data Bank that we call FDDM. The FDDM was established based on the cabinet decisions in year 2001 in order to hire a foreign expert in solving homicide cases. In 2004, a series of discussions on a new DNA identification bill took place between officials of the Forensic Laboratory and Legal Division officer from Royal Malaysian Police. It also involved the Legal Advisor Division on the Ministry of Home Affairs of Malaysia and the Drafting Division of the Attorney General's Chambers. After being debated and passed, it has been given royal assent in 2009. 3 years later, the DNA Act 2009 has been enforced in September 2012. According to the DNA Identification Act, any use of the data bank should only be used for the purpose of forensic comparison with the DNA profile related to an investigation.
And that brings me to our main question today. The big jewelry heist last year that your department helped solve. This incident took place in broad daylight. It became viral. There was a lot of pressure on your department, but you solved it in record time. In 1 month is what I hear.
Yeah.
So how did you do it? Please tell us. Take us step by step.
In early year 2022, a male aged around 50s, who is the owner of the jewelry shop, during his stop at a petrol station to fuel his car, and he was robbed by a group of men in the broad daylight. The perpetrator drove 3 cars and suddenly blocked the victim cars. The victim was attacked as soon as he parked his car at a fuel pump. The suspect aggressively smashed the victim using the machetes, car window, and took off with 3 bags of jewelry. The victim pursued the suspect car, and then a collision happened, which made the suspect car turn over. Although the suspects managed to escape, and the victim suffered minor injuries. 2 bags of jewelry and machetes believed to be a weapon used during the robbery were recovered in the suspect car at the scene of the accident scene. The incident was recorded in petrol station CCTV. The following days, this case has gone viral on the social media and raised public concern. This case also caught the attention of our divisions, D13, which is our DNA Data Bank of Malaysia division, and we had deployed our DNA intelligence team to assist the investigator. Upon further inspection of the suspect car, we managed to collect about 7 DNA tracer samples, and we analyzed in our laboratory. Result from the analysis provide 2 unknown male profile, which were labeled as a male X and a male Y. These 2 DNA profiles were uploaded into the FDDM. We have found a positive hit that matched male X, but male Y still mystery. The information was given to the operation team. We supplied the information or the detail, and the operation team was carried out to track and apprehend the suspect, male X, that has been identified. Within 48 hours, the police managed to caught the suspect, or we call it male X, and later apprehend another 7 men who were believed to be the suspect of the case in the series of arrests by operational police division team. All the suspects were brought into custody and their buccal swab were taken. All the profiles were uploaded into FDDM, and one of the sample was matched to the male Y, that the mystery before it. And now we know among of the 7 perpetrators, one of is a male Y. The suspect was charged of a gang robbery. This is an initiative that we have taken from our DNA intelligence team, that the crime scenes investigation team, what we call the CSI, already covered everything, and sent the sample to the chemist department, chemia. That's guide us to Mr. X and Mr. Y.
Fascinating again. And I'm sure we're going to see more cases like these being solved in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Already, your program is a beacon in the region, is a great example of how strong legislation coupled with good implementation can lead to safer communities, can control crime well.
Yeah.
So, would you like to comment where you see your program in the next 5 years or 10 years?
Conventional DNA profiling is a lengthy process, and it may take an especially prolonged time to laboratories that receive a high volume of casework. Smaller, faster, and less costly analysis tool will reduce capital investment for crime laboratories while increasing their capacity to process more cases.
Thank you, Dr. Hakim. Your program is certainly an inspiration not just to the Asia region, but I'm sure countries all around the world.
Thank you so much.
Back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Sarah. It really does sound like Malaysia is positioning itself to become one of the strongest DNA database programs in Asia. With a world-class casework crime lab in the Department of Chemistry, an amazing database being built by the Royal Malaysia Police, it's going to be an incredible program. Hits like this will start to happen routinely in Malaysia.
What an impressive selection of cases this year. There was so much happening with DNA databases throughout the world, especially within developing countries, where excitement is building as they begin to create their own DNA database programs. And why not? All countries want to use the power of DNA databases to solve crime, exonerate the innocent, identify loved ones, as well as protect the most vulnerable populations. Before we conclude the 2023 DNA Hit of the Year program, we'd like to thank all the agencies that submitted cases and took part in this year's event.
And of course, a big thank you to Thermo Fisher Scientific for sponsoring the annual DNA Hit of the Year program. Their sponsorship is truly making a difference in our ability to share with the world the value of DNA database programs.
Thanks for watching.
See you next year.